Today, as you know, we're here today to discuss the internal investigation related to the Link Road officer-involved shooting from February 17th, 2018. When you arrived, you were provided with a copy of the news release as well as a citation for a Virginia Court of Appeals case that was referenced by Special Prosecutor Brian Porter, and you also have information about that we have added to existing policy after this incident. Chief Zudema is about to come up to the podium, and he will start by reading that news release, and then afterwards he'll take a limited number of questions. Chief Zudema's name is spelled R-Y-A-N-Z-U-I-D-E-M-A.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the community and media for your patience during this process and for continuing to respect the privacy of everyone involved in this incident. We have completed our internal investigation into the officer-involved shooting that occurred February 17th, 2018 on Link Road. This was a tragic situation for all involved. We know the repercussions from this tragic event have been and will continue to be a difficult road for many. We do not take that lightly. We want to thank the community for its patience. We recognize that this has been a lengthy investigation, and we wish we could have shared this information sooner, but we have not been able to comment on or complete several pieces of the investigation due to pending criminal and civil litigation. Now that both are complete, we want to ensure transparency and help facilitate healing by providing the outcome of our internal review as well as what we have changed to make sure this does not happen again. Every day, our officers make split-second decisions based on the information they have at the time. The overwhelming majority of the time, we get it right. What occurred nearly 2 years ago on February 17th, 2018 was an anomaly for the Lynchburg Police Department, not our standard, and as always, we strive to ensure that your police department is among the most highly trained agencies in the Commonwealth. We absolutely recognize that we could have done better in this situation. We have reviewed this incident as we do for all uses of force, and as a result of that investigation, we have enhanced our current policies so that officers can better assess situations like this in the future. All of our officers have been trained on that new policy. A portion of that training included information we received from Special Prosecutor Brian Porter, the Alexandria Commonwealth's attorney, about a Virginia Court of Appeals case relevant to these situations. Since this incident, we have worked with our partners at the Central Virginia Criminal Justice Academy, where all LPD officers receive their initial law enforcement training to ensure that topics covered are consistent with relevant case law. Prior to the Lynchburg Police Department taking any administrative action in relation to this incident, both Eddie Farron and Savannah Simmons resigned from the department. We want to thank the Virginia State Police and Special Prosecutor Brian Porter for their objective review of what happened that night. We also want to recognize the professionalism of the LPD sworn and professional staff in handling questions and concerns that arose as a result of this tragic incident. We are committed to working with the community to better serve the needs of this city, and we are dedicated to serving as a police department residents and visitors can trust. Before taking your questions, I'd like to just give you a real short kind of synopsis of timeline that led up to this event. In the evening hours of February 16th, 2018, officers were on patrol in the area of Link Road, and at the residence in question observed a screen door on the front of the house open around 8 p.m. They later traveled back through that area around 12:30 a.m., saw that same screen door open. A short time later, roughly around 1 a.m., now we're on February 17th of 2018, the officers came back to check on that again because they thought that was a little bit abnormal. These were officers that worked that area on a regular basis. When they come back at 1 a.m., they actually use their spotlight to illuminate the front of the, from their vehicle to illuminate the front of the residence. In doing that, they see that not just the screen door, but the main door is open, and open enough that they can see into the residence. From there, they parked their vehicles, got out on foot, and proceeded to the residence to check and see, make sure everything was okay. And then obviously from there, you've seen the video and you kind of know what's taken place since then. So at this time, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have and clarify any of the information I already provided.
Chief, can you walk us through, thank you for these press comments, but can you walk us through the directive that's on the second page of this handout and how that's different from what was previously in place?
Just want to make sure, Richard, I'm referring to the same thing here. Can you give me the letter and the number?
It's the second page of the handout. It's the number 2, information added to alarm and open door response directive. So was everything that I'm saying there, was all of that added?
Correct. So what you see there is an excerpt from the policy that it was added to. This information, it does mirror some of the information that was already in the policy related to alarm response, because those are in a similar policy, or in the same policy rather. So some of that mirrors that, but this, all that you see here is new information that was added specifically to an open door section for that policy in question.
Can you tell us when it came into effect?
I'd have to get you the date on that. I can get that afterwards if you'd like.
Were some of these policies that are added, they came from this case that you have referenced as number 1, 2, or what would you say?
Yeah, so some of that information definitely is in relation to, at the conclusion, if you recall, special prosecutor in the case, Mr. Porter from Alexandria, said that, hey, in his opinion, in analysis of this case, that some of the facts of this case were similar to the case of Kyer versus Commonwealth from 2005. So in review of that case, as well as in review of other documents we already had, we put this information together and included that in the policy. That's correct.
So with some of the officers that are going through the academy now, and a lot of the officers that are new and that are coming in, what are you doing, I guess, in the training room when it comes to applying this and making sure they know it? Because again, it is new for even those that have been with the department for quite some time too.
Well, and I'd caution with you saying it's new. So some of the basic tenets of what is in here is stuff that's been taught in the academy for quite some time. We did get with the academy, however, as a result of this, we sat down with them to ensure that, first and foremost, the Kyer case that was referenced by Mr. Porter was being taught in the academy, which it is now. We've made sure that our internal training that our officers get on a regular basis, so our officers never complete training when they're done with the academy. The DCGS standards require they get 40 hours of in-service training every 2 years, and we usually do above and beyond that internally. So from the training perspective, we're making sure that the officers, first and foremost, have reviewed this policy. We have an electronic signature system internally that requires the officers go in, they read through the policy, then they actually answer test questions on that in order to quote-unquote pass that. As long as they do that, they pass that, and they've shown that they've read that policy. We've also implemented training related to this policy. So we go out to our range at least twice a year to shoot firearms, qualify with weapons, and do other tactical related training. So part of that training is scenario-based training, and in that scenario-based training, we're making sure not only the officers are able to utilize the equipment that they have on their belts, but we also make sure that the scenarios require them to consider relevant court case information as they work through the scenario. So it's not just about can they utilize whatever the tool is they pull off of their belt to address that situation. It's are they thinking through that scenario before they even get to that point. So that's some of the training that we're doing, and obviously making sure that they understand the policy. And these policies are reviewed depending on the policy. We are a CLIA accredited agency, a nationally accredited agency, have been since 1989, and those policies are reviewed on a regular basis, as this one will be with all of our officers.
And you've been with the department for some time, but you weren't chief at the time this happened. So one, what's it been like, given that the city's already settled with a $12 million settlement with the gentleman involved? The officers have gone, they've left. So what's it been like for you?
So I was not the chief, you're correct, when this incident took place, but this has been my home as a police officer for the last 23 plus years, and this has definitely been a challenging time for all of us, just like it has been for the folks that were involved in this incident that are not law enforcement officers. It's required us to take a step back and to do a critical analysis of what we do on a daily basis, and to ensure that the level of service that we're providing to the community is the most well-informed, well-instructed, and well-supported through the case law that we've included in our policy. But yeah, it's been difficult, certainly, and we recognize it's certainly been difficult for the involved family as well.
And why inform the public today? Why hold this press conference?
Well, we've told the public and you in the media since the get-go that, once we got through this investigation, that we'd be able to provide you a limited amount of information from that. It's important for us to be transparent. I can't sit there and just be transparent when there's good news, quite honestly. I need to be able to come and stand in front of all of you, regardless of what the situation is, and provide the facts, at least to the extent that I can, to you. We need to make sure that the community trusts us, and this is a part of helping to ensure that trust in the community, and being transparent when we do really well, and also being transparent when we could have done better.
Chief, I talked to Mr. Porter about this very issue. I want to ask you, let's say there was a medical emergency in that house, and those guys, Farron and Savannah, went in and actually saved someone's life. For those who talk about the split-second decisions that you guys have to make, those guys could have been heroes. How do you rationalize that scenario? Or, according to these new policies, is that scenario null and void?
It's definitely not null and void. You know, there's still plenty of case law out there, as well as legal instruction from both Virginia courts and the Supreme Court of the United States that talk about exigency in terms of when officers can go into a residence without a warrant. And certainly the situation you described, if someone is in a home that has been a victim of a crime, or someone is a home that's been has some type of medical emergency, something like that, absolutely, we need our officers to assess that. And the reality is our officers often get split seconds to make critical decisions. And again, 99% of the time, I think we do a really good job and get it right. We could have done better in this situation. So this does not change the fact that our officers still are going to be put in difficult situations. They're going to have to assess the limited facts they may have in some circumstances to make the best decision they can. And if that decision is they believe they need to go into a house in the scenario you provided to help someone with a medical emergency, certainly my expectation is they do that, and we will absolutely support them in doing that.
Chief,
Oh, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, you mentioned in your statement here that the 2 officers involved resigned before any administrative action could be taken. The chief of the department now, if this happened under your leadership, would this have risen to the level of a fireable offense?
I'm not going to speak in terms of what we would or wouldn't do from a personnel matter. I will say that, there were policies that were violated, and I will say that there were things we absolutely could have done better that evening. The officers in this situation, the former officers that were involved, I don't think they had any malice or ill will when they went to that residence. I think they were doing what they thought was right at the time. Obviously, hindsight is always 20/20. And certainly there were other steps that probably could have been taken in that situation to gather more information. So I won't speak or comment on any personnel-related matters in terms of whether this was a fireable offense or not.
Can you tell us specifically what was violated?
I won't, again, I'm not going to speak just for kind of this question and any other questions. I'm not going to speak specifically to what policy was violated or who violated it. I will say that there were some policy violations, and we certainly take that we don't take that lightly at all. We want to make...
Why not tell us? You just talked about transparency. Why not share that with
Because these are personnel matters involving our officers and former officers in this case. And, they have a certain right under the law to certain things not being released. And not in this situation am I going to release a personnel matter related to actions that officers took on duty.
So you can't say, even without mentioning who may have violated the policy, you can't say what policy was violated?
Well, there are steps that need to be taken in any incident like this. And when we talk about steps that need to be taken, we want to gather as much information as we can. There were other things that could have been gathered in that situation that may have prevented this incident from taking place. Obviously our expectation, and certainly again hindsight is 20/20, but we want to make sure that our officers are gathering as much information as time allows them, depending on the circumstances, to then make the most rational decision they can based on the information they're able to obtain.
Will you reach out to Mr. Ziegler?
So we have asked the city attorney, Mr. Irwin, who's been involved in this case from early on, to reach out to the Ziegler's family attorney. They have requested from the outset of this as much privacy as we could help provide them, and that's why we're doing that. And I would just ask all of you to continue as you have done, I think, to respect their privacy. They've not wanted to be in the front of this at all since day one, and we've done the best we can. We spoke to them that evening in the hospital. We gave them our apology that evening, and we're certainly very sorry for what's happened, but we're not going to disrespect their request for privacy on this.
And this is the internal investigation from the Lynchburg Police Department, but what about the results from the Virginia State investigation into the same incident? Is that something that will be shared with us as well? Or?
So that would have to come from the Virginia State Police. They don't even share all of that with us. So what happens, just so you know, from a protocol standpoint, our internal investigators in the police department, when they're looking at an administrative issue like this, will reach out to the state police, and then quite honestly, it's up to them on whether they release some, all, or none of that criminal investigation. So we don't have a copy of their criminal investigation, their file. That's something, if you chose, you would have to reach out to them to get that.
The 2 officers who resigned, do you know if they're employed in law enforcement somewhere?
To my knowledge, they are not, but I don't know that definitively.
Does this act or this issue disqualify them? You've been in law enforcement long enough. Are they done, for lack of a better term?
So to my understanding, there's no legal precedent that would prevent them from entering back into law enforcement, but obviously based on some of the circumstances, that would be whatever department that they applied to would have to look through that and make a determination for themselves if they were comfortable employing them.
Would you hire them again? Let's say they came from another jurisdiction and this happened, would you give them an opportunity to work for the LPD?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that, Andre. I mean, I think that, the situation speaks for itself, quite honestly. And again, a lot of this is personnel related. These are not folks that are coming from somewhere else. These are folks that did work here, so.
And I know you said that all of this is not a new policy. Are you able to point out which one of these policies have been added since this incident and what was standing before that?
So all that you see, just for clarification, all that you see on those 2 pages below number 2 where it says information added, all that has been added. Just for clarification, some of that mirrors what's already in some of our alarm response in that portion of the policy, but all this is new at the end of that policy.
Were there any other changes or additions to policies?
No. This is the only policy that we updated as a result of that. Again, we've changed some of our training, certainly, to make sure that our officers clearly understand our expectations with this and to make sure that they're getting that training in the academy as well. But other than that, we review policies. All of our policies are reviewed on a regular basis. That's required under our accreditation.
So to clarify, the training that you're mentioning, is that training exclusively related to this addition or also training related to other things?
So just training in general related to not only the policy that's in place that you've seen here in front of you, but also making sure folks understand, again, some of the things I mentioned before, like showing up at this type of an incident, what are the expectations of what types of information we gather, right? What should be done, again, time permitting, before any type of other action is taken. So that's all encompassed, and a lot of that's encompassed into scenario-based training that we do with our officers.
Okay. If I could also ask, there was discussion when this initially happened 2 years ago about the release of names and the release of body camera footage. If I remember correctly, at the time, Chief Diaz says that the way the policies had been written before the incident didn't allow him to release that. I'm curious, his words was, when an officer joins the department, they sign off with all of these policies, and there was no policy that mandated that the police department release the name of an officer 3 days after an incident similar to what's in Danville. I'm curious if you've considered those policies, if they might need to be updated.
So I can't speak for what Chief Diaz said. I'm not sure the reference there, quite honestly. Not saying he didn't say that or you don't have it accurate, but I can't speak for that. What I can say in terms of releasing officers' names, we don't have a policy that says we won't. What we do, and I think you've seen this in several incidents since the Link Road incident, where after a period of time we have released those officers' names. What we do in that, so you understand, is when officers are involved in critical incidents like this, one of the things we want to do before we release their name is we do a threat assessment to make sure there's not any outstanding threats towards the officers. Not necessarily particular to this incident, but other incidents sometimes have the ability to create some tension in the community where folks want to potentially threaten officers. We've had situations certainly where officers have been threatened after critical incidents. So what we do is we do a threat assessment to make sure that our officers, if we release their name, that there's not any jeopardy that will create or cause for them outside of what's already taken place. And in those situations, in most cases, I think you've seen us release their names. Don't quote me on this, but probably within a week, maybe 10 days at the most in most of those. And that's our intention in the future, is to continue to release their names after we've done a threat assessment to make sure it's not going to put them or their families in any more danger by releasing their names.
What about the body camera footage?
So in this case, the body camera footage is very simple. I think that what's been released by Mr. Porter, and we conferred on that. Obviously, that was ultimately his decision because he was the prosecutor of that case, but we talked through that. We were certainly comfortable with what was released. It shows the crux of what took place in this incident. We're not releasing additional footage in this situation, primarily first and foremost out of respect for the privacy of the family. Again, they've asked from the outset that their privacy be respected, and there's certainly things in that video that they would not, I'm sure, want to see or hear, and so we're not going to release it. There's also another reason we don't release some of the video, not just in this situation, but others of similar, because some of the video shows tactical maneuvers that our officers make, and that's not safe for our officers to have information out there about how they move and what they do and steps they take in certain situations. So.
Based on the facts of the case, how would these new policies have prevented the events of February 17th?
Well, good question. I don't know that any policy that you ever write will ever prevent anything. The policy has got to be first read and understood by our officers, which I hope it is. We put things in place to make sure that they read it and they're tested on it, right? But then ultimately what they are required to do, they are put into a situation that is in some cases rapidly evolving. They're put in a situation where they don't have all the information they need, and they have to interpret that policy, whatever it may be, to that situation and make the best decision that they can based on that information. So our hope certainly is, to your question, that this policy will help them and make them better understand some of the steps that need to be taken in these types of situations. But I don't know that any policy will ever be able to guarantee, which is why we do additional training. We put these officers in scenario-based training so that they can take that knowledge that they have from the policy and then apply it to a scenario that they're in.
How many officers do you have right now that you can say have gone through this and are aware and have passed or failed or whatever?
Yeah, so every sworn officer in the department has been through the policy, and then as new officers come on, they're required to go through policy as well. So what happens when officers get done at the police academy, they graduate, and I think the assumption is they automatically just go and hit the street and start working. Well, we keep them, in Lynchburg anyway, we keep them for about a month internally to review policies, to review procedures and that. So all those new officers, before they go out onto the street, will have reviewed all that policy as well, so.
Prior to the February 17th incident, were Farron and Simmons ever disciplined by the department for any reason?
Again, I'm not going to discuss personnel matters related to officers or former officers.
You can't tell us if there were any complaints lodged against them?
I don't have that information available, and quite honestly, if I did, that's not something that we normally share. It's personnel-related matters, yeah.
Can you help us understand why not share more? You mentioned their personnel matters. Why not divulge more?
Well, because they have an expectation, quite honestly, to some level of privacy. They also have due process, and I think sometimes, unfortunately, in certain situations that folks think that when you put a badge on that you forfeit your due process. You know, they have the same due process as you saw in this case, the officers did, that any citizen that was charged with a crime would. And, you know, the presumption needs to be just like citizens. The presumption needs to be of innocence until they're proven guilty. So in a lot of these situations, these are very fluid situations. They take a lot of time to investigate. And ultimately, it comes down to a decision of we're not going to release personnel information.
But are we after that stage? I mean, they've gone through court. They have been found guilty in court. Aren't we past that due process stage where court is adjudicated?
Checks written.
Yeah, so we're certainly past their due process. They've resigned from the department. They're no longer here. But the question that you're asking me is, do we release that information on them? Well, the problem is that if I release it now, then you're going to have the expectation it's released every time for current employees as well. And that's not something we've chosen to do as a police department.
Can you talk about the difference in experience between the two? Is it some type of policy with the LPD to send out someone like a Farron who had 20-plus years versus Savannah who had a year and a half or so?
I'll be very honest with you, Andre. I wish I had enough resources and the ability to say, hey, this type of call requires this type of person. But as you know, and you've heard me say many times before, we are challenged with staffing and continue to be challenged with that. You know, for example, the night in question that we're talking about on Link Road, prior to this incident taking place, the priority that evening was a double fatality traffic accident on Leesville Road that had a bunch of our resources tied up. And something like that, much like to the point of your question, requires experienced officers to be able to look at that scene, to be able to reconstruct that scene and determine what happened there. So we had a lot of resources over there. And so in a perfect world, yes, I'd love to be able to say, hey, based on the nature of the call or what's going on, I want to send an officer with X number of years and make sure it's not, you know, 2 officers with only 4 years of experience or whatever it may be. But, you know, we have limited staffing, and those officers respond based on the priority of the call as well as the area they're assigned to. So.
One last question.
All right. Doing well. I appreciate you asking. And again, I just, in closing, I want to say, first and foremost, thank you all for being here. Again, I want to thank the community for their patience with this. You know, this is certainly an incident that we've learned from as a law enforcement agency. We will continue to do that as we move forward. We're committed to this community, to being your police department, one that you can trust, and one that can be as transparent as possible as we can with you. So we thank you for your time and appreciate you being here. Hope you have a good day.